Hejin flew through the empty space between stars, his massive wings spreading wide enough to catch the solar winds. He was the last of his kind, a stellar dragon. His scales shimmered with deep blue and purple colors that matched the nebulas around him. Each scale was as large as a spaceship, and they protected him from the harsh conditions of space. He had been flying alone for many years now. The last time he had seen another stellar dragon was when the Frost Empire's ships had attacked his family. That day, he had watched helplessly as they captured his sister. He never saw her again. Today, Hejin was searching for water. Stellar dragons needed huge amounts of water to keep flying through space. Without it, their internal fire would burn too hot, and they would lose their power to travel between stars. He had heard rumors of a water-rich planet in this part of the galaxy, but he had to be careful. The Frost Empire controlled many worlds in this region. As Hejin approached the cluster of stars, his sensitive ears picked up a strange sound. It was the quiet hum of engines, but they were trying to stay silent. He turned his massive head, looking in all directions with his glowing golden eyes. Something wasn't right. Suddenly, the darkness of space lit up with bright lights. 20 warships of the Frost Empire appeared around him. Dropping their cloaking shields, they had set up a trap, hiding behind different stars, and waiting for him. The ships were made of pale blue crystal, sharp and dangerous looking, like ice shards floating in space. Target locked. A cold voice announced over the ship's broadcast system. This is Commander Kita of the Frost Empire. The dragon is surrounded. Hejin roared, and the sound traveled through space, making the smaller ships shake. He could fight. Stellar dragons were powerful beings, but he was tired and thirsty. He hadn't found water in many days, and his strength was not what it used to be. Commander Kita stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the dragon with hungry eyes. He was tall and thin, with pale blue skin like all members of the Frost Empire. His uniform was white with sharp edges, matching their ship's crystal design. A cruel smile formed on his face as he gave the order. Launch the capture nets. Energy nets shot out from all the ships at once, glowing with a sickly green color. Hejin tried to dodge them, moving his huge body with surprising grace for his size. He managed to avoid the first wave of nets, and his tail smashed into one of the smaller ships, sending it spinning away. But there were too many nets, and he was too weak. One caught his left wing, then another wrapped around his neck. Hejin fought against them, his scales glowing brighter as he used his power to try to break free. More nets kept coming, wrapping around his body until he could barely move. The dragon is secured, an officer reported to Commander Kita. Energy readings show it's weakening. The lack of water has made it vulnerable, just as our intelligence suggested. Commander Kita nodded, pleased with how well their plan had worked. Bring it in. The scientists are eager to begin their work. Soon, we will unlock the secrets of immortality that hide in its blood. Hejin could only watch as the ships began to pull him toward their main base on planet Frost 7. His proud head drooped and his glow dimmed. He had survived so long, escaped so many traps, but his thirst had finally made him too weak to fight back. As the cold ships dragged him through space, he sent out one last desperate call, a telepathic cry for help that echoed through the stars. But in this empty part of space, who would hear him? Who would dare to stand against the mighty Frost Empire to help one lonely dragon? The crystal walls of the Frost Empire's prison fortress sparkled under bright white lights. Hejin lay chained in an enormous chamber, his once bright scales now dull and lifeless. Heavy metal restraints held down his wings, tail, and neck. The room was so large it could hold 10 spaceships, but for a stellar dragon, it felt terribly small. Chief Scientist Jiho walked into the chamber, followed by a team of researchers. They all wore white lab coats that matched their pale blue skin. Jiho was shorter than Commander Kita, but moved with the same cold confidence. He carried a tablet that showed many charts and readings about the dragon's condition. Begin today's tests, Jiho ordered. His voice was flat and emotionless, as if Hejin were just another lab specimen. Remember, Commander Kita wants results quickly. The dragon's blood is the key to eternal life, and we must find out how to extract its power. The scientists turned on their machines. Sharp needles as long as cars pierced Hejin's scales, drawing out small amounts of his precious blood. The dragon didn't roar anymore. He had learned that showing pain only made them more excited. Instead, he closed his golden eyes and tried to remember flying free among the stars. Interesting, Jai-Ho said, looking at his readings. The blood samples show unusual properties when exposed to different temperatures. He pressed a button, and suddenly the air in the chamber became freezing cold. Ice crystals formed on Hejin's scales. Then, just as quickly, the temperature changed to burning hot. Hejin's body shuddered. These extreme temperature changes were hard to handle without water. Stellar dragons needed water not just to fly, but to control their internal temperature. It had been days since they had given him even a small drink. His throat felt like it was filled with stardust. Commander Kita entered the chamber to check on their progress. He walked right up to Hejin's massive head, showing no fear. "Has it revealed any secrets yet?" he asked Jai-Ho. "We're making progress," Jai-Ho replied. "The dragon's blood contains incredible healing properties, but something is blocking us from accessing its full power. We believe severe dehydration might weaken its natural defenses." The commander smiled. "Then keep withholding water. Break its resistance. I don't care what it takes. I want the secret to immortality." He looked into Hejin's eyes. "Your kind has lived for thousands of years, flying through space as if you own it. Now it's our turn." Hejin gathered his remaining strength and sent a blast of telepathic energy toward Kita. The commander stumbled back, surprised by the mental attack. But then he laughed. "Still fighting? Good. It means there's still power to be taken from you." The tests continued all day. The scientists tried different experiments. Changing air pressure, testing various chemicals, scanning Hejin's internal organs. Each test made him weaker. His mighty body, which had once soared through solar storms, now trembled with exhaustion. That night, when the scientists finally left, Hejin was alone in the dark chamber. His throat burned with thirst. Even breathing hurt. He had heard the scientists talking about something called a solar eclipse coming soon. They seemed excited about it, which made him worry. In his semi-conscious state, Hejin thought he felt a gentle mind touch his own. It wasn't cold and probing like the scientists' machines. This felt different, warm, concerned, but he was so weak, he couldn't be sure if it was real or just a dream born from his desperate hope for rescue. As he drifted into an uneasy sleep, his parched body aching, Hejin remembered an old legend among his kind. It said that long ago, stellar dragons and humans had been friends, working together to explore the galaxy. But that was just a story, wasn't it? In his current reality, trapped in this crystal fortress, such tales of friendship seemed as distant as the farthest stars. Yun-Ho stood in front of his computer screen in the research facility's lower level, frowning at the strange energy readings. He was a young human scientist who had come to Planet Frost 7 as part of a research exchange program. His dark hair fell into his eyes as he leaned closer to the screen, trying to understand what he was seeing. The energy patterns were unlike anything he had studied before. They showed something alive in the high-security section of the fortress, something massive. Whatever it was, it gave off waves of power that his instruments could barely measure. "You seem very interested in those readings," a quiet voice said behind him. Yun-Ho turned quickly to see Sun-Mai, a security officer of the Frost Empire. Unlike the other blue-skinned officers, she didn't look at him with suspicion. Instead, her eyes showed concern. "These patterns are unusual," Yun-Ho said carefully. He had learned to be cautious when talking to the Frost Empire's people. "They suggest a very large energy source in the restricted area. I've never seen anything like it." Sun-Mai looked around to make sure they were alone. "What you're seeing," she whispered, is a stellar dragon. She watched Yunho's eyes grow wide with surprise. Commander Kita captured it 3 days ago. They're keeping it secret from most of the staff. Yunho had read about stellar dragons in old books. These amazing creatures could fly through space without ships, living for thousands of years. But he thought they were extinct. Why are they hiding it? He asked. They're running experiments on it, Sunmai said, her voice filled with disgust. They think dragon blood holds the secret to eternal life. But their tests. She stopped, looking troubled. That night, after most of the staff had left, Yunho used his research clearance to access more data about the dragon. The more he learned, the more worried he became. The scientists were torturing the creature, denying it water, exposing it to extreme conditions. According to the reports, they planned to kill it during the upcoming solar eclipse. Yunho couldn't sleep that night. He kept thinking about the dragon, alone and suffering in the fortress. The next day, he started watching the guard patterns and security camera locations. He noticed when the shifts changed and which corridors were less watched. He also began collecting water. Each day, he filled small containers and hid them in his lab. Yunho knew it wasn't much. A stellar dragon would need much more. But it was all he could manage without drawing attention. As he worked in his lab one evening, Yunho felt something brush against his mind. It was like a gentle touch, sad but curious. He realized with amazement that the dragon was reaching out telepathically, probably too weak to control its powers properly. Yunho closed his eyes and tried to send back feelings of comfort and help. He didn't know if the dragon could understand him, but he had to try. The touch in his mind grew slightly stronger, then faded away. That moment changed everything for Yunho. This wasn't just about saving an endangered creature anymore. He had felt the dragon's intelligence, its pain, and its gentle nature. He knew he had to help, even if it meant risking everything. He began making plans. The solar eclipse was coming in 5 days. That didn't give him much time, but he had some advantages. Being human, many of the Frost Empire's people ignored him, thinking he wasn't important. They didn't notice him studying their schedules or making careful notes about the fortress's layout. As Yunho walked home that night, he looked up at the stars. Somewhere up there, stellar dragons had once flown freely. He made a promise to himself and to the captured dragon. He would find a way to help. He just hoped he could figure out how before it was too late. The night shift at the fortress was quieter than the day shift. Most of the scientists had gone home, leaving only a few guards to patrol the corridors. Yunho waited in his lab until midnight, watching the security cameras through his computer. When the guards started their usual break, he knew it was time to move. He picked up his backpack, filled with containers of water. The weight made him nervous. If anyone stopped him, how would he explain carrying so much water? But he had to try. Moving quietly, he made his way through the dark hallways toward the restricted section. Using his research badge, Yunho opened the first security door. His heart beat faster with each step. He had memorized the guard patterns, but one change in their routine would ruin everything. The second door required both his badge and a fingerprint scan. He held his breath as the scanner read his print, then sighed with relief when the door opened. Finally, he reached the massive chamber where they kept the dragon. Even in the dim night lighting, Hojin was an impressive sight. The dragon's scales gave off a faint glow, though much weaker than before. Its eyes were closed, and its breathing seemed shallow. Yunho approached slowly, not wanting to frighten the massive creature. "Hello," he whispered. "I brought you water." Heijin's eyes opened slowly. Golden light filled the room as the dragon turned its huge head to look at the small human. Yunho felt the dragon's mind touch his, gentle but cautious. Unlike the brief contact before, this time the connection was clear and strong. Images flowed into Yunho's mind. He saw space as Hojin saw it. Beautiful, endless, full of colors humans couldn't see. He felt the joy of flying through star clouds and the peace of floating in nebulas. Then the memories turned darker. He saw other dragons being captured, their bodies twisted by cruel experiments, as the Frost Empire searched for immortality. "I'm so sorry," Yunho said quietly. He opened his backpack and took out the water containers. "It's not much, but it should help a little." Hejin watched as Yunho poured the water into the dragon's mouth. The effect was immediate. The dull scales brightened slightly, and the dragon's breathing became easier. Through their mental connection, Yunho felt Hejin's gratitude and relief. More images appeared in Yunho's mind. He saw Hejin's family, other stellar dragons with scales in different colors. They had lived peacefully, exploring the galaxy, until the Frost Empire began hunting them. Now Hejin was the last one left. "I'm going to help you escape," Yunho promised. "But we have to be careful. They're planning something during the solar eclipse, and we need to act before then." Hejin's mental touch grew stronger. The dragon showed Yunho how the eclipse would affect its powers. During those few minutes of darkness, stellar dragons became weaker. That's when the Frost Empire planned to kill Hejin and take all of its blood. As they shared thoughts and memories, a deep trust began to form between them. Hejin sensed Yunho's honest desire to help, so different from the cold minds of the scientists. Yunho understood the dragon's intelligence and gentle nature, seeing why these magnificent creatures had once been called the guardians of the galaxy. "I'll come back tomorrow night," Yunho promised as he gathered the empty containers. "Try to rest and save your strength." As he turned to leave, Hejin sent him one last image, a memory of young dragons learning to fly among the stars, guided by older ones. The message was clear. Once, dragons had protected and taught other species. Now, it was time for a human to return that kindness. Yunho sat in his laboratory the next morning, reviewing security files on his computer. His eyes were tired from staying up late with Hejin, but he couldn't rest. There were only 3 days left until the eclipse. As he studied the fortress blueprints, Sun Mai entered the lab and closed the door behind her. "I know you visited the dragon last night," she said quietly. Yunho's heart stopped for a moment, but Sun Mai raised her hand to calm him. "Don't worry. I erased the security footage, but you need to be more careful." Yunho relaxed slightly. "Thank you. I couldn't just let them torture Hejin." He looked at Sun Mai carefully. "Why are you helping me?" Sun Mai sat down, her blue skin looking paler than usual. "I joined the Frost Empire's security force because I wanted to protect people. But what Commander Kita is doing is wrong. He doesn't just want to study the dragon. He wants to drink its blood." She pulled out her tablet and showed Yunho a secret file. "Look at this. Kita has ordered special equipment for the eclipse. They're going to drain all of Hejin's blood at once. They think the eclipse will make the dragon too weak to resist." Yunho read the file with growing horror. The commander had ordered huge tanks to hold the dragon's blood. He planned to give it to the Frost Empire's leaders, promising them eternal life. But the process would kill Hejin slowly and painfully. "We have to stop them," Yunho said. "But how? The fortress is full of guards, and Hejin is too weak to break free alone." Sun Mai pointed to something on the blueprint. "The fortress runs on crystal power. Each section has its own power source, but they're all connected to the main crystal in the control room." She smiled slightly. "And I have access to that room." They spent the next hour making plans. Sun Mai knew the guard schedules and which systems they could safely disable. Yunho understood the scientific equipment and how to shut it down without triggering alarms. Later that day, Yunho overheard 2 scientists talking in the hallway. They were excited about the eclipse, saying it was the perfect time to kill the dragon. The moon would block the sun for exactly 6 minutes. During that time, Hejin would lose most of its power. That night, Yunho visited Hejin again, bringing more water. The dragon's scales looked a little brighter now, but it was still too weak to break its chains. Through their mental connection, Yunho shared the escape plan. Hejin showed Yunho more memories. The dragon revealed how stellar dragons could use the energy of stars to become stronger. But during an eclipse, when the starlight was blocked, they became vulnerable. That's why the Frost Empire had chosen this moment to strike. "We'll get you out before the eclipse," Yunho promised. "Sunlight will help us, but you'll need to save your strength. No more telepathy until then. It uses too much energy." As Yunho turned to leave, He-Jin sent him one last image. It showed Commander Kita meeting with other Frost Empire leaders, promising them power beyond their dreams. The dragon wanted Yunho to understand that this wasn't just about saving one creature. It was about stopping the Frost Empire from gaining dangerous power. Walking back to his quarters, Yunho felt the weight of their task. In 2 days, they would have to disable the fortress's security, free a weakened dragon, and escape before hundreds of guards could stop them. One mistake would mean death for all of them. But when he remembered the cruel smile on Commander Kita's face, Yunho knew they had no choice. They had to try. The day of the eclipse arrived. Dark clouds gathered above the crystal fortress, as if nature itself knew something important was about to happen. Yunho arrived at work early, carrying his usual bag. But today, instead of water containers, it held tools for disabling security systems. Sunmai met him in the research lab. She wore her regular security uniform, but her eyes showed worry. "Commander Kita called in extra guards," she whispered. "They're everywhere. Are you sure we should try this today?" "We have to," Yunho replied. "Tomorrow will be too late." He checked his computer one last time. The eclipse would start in 4 hours. They had to free He-Jin before then. They put their plan into action. Sun Mai went to the control room, telling the other guards she needed to check the security systems. Once inside, she began carefully shutting down the power crystals that supplied energy to different parts of the fortress. Yunho walked toward He-Jin's chamber, trying to look calm. He passed several guards, nodding to them as usual. His heart beat faster with each step. When he reached the main science lab, he found Chief Scientist Jae-ho preparing the blood-draining equipment. "What are you doing here?" Jae-ho asked, looking suspicious. "This area is restricted today." "Final data check," Yunho said, holding up his tablet. "Commander Kita's orders. We need to make sure all readings are correct before the eclipse." Jae-ho studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Be quick about it." He turned back to his work, not noticing as Yunho slipped a small device onto the main control panel. At exactly noon, everything happened at once. The device Yunho planted sent an electromagnetic pulse through the lab's systems. In the control room, Sun Li disabled the last power crystal. Throughout the fortress, lights flickered and died. Security doors clicked open as their locks failed. Alarms began blaring, but they sounded far away and weak without full power. Yunho ran to He-Jin's chamber. The massive dragon was already breaking free from its weakened restraints, scales glowing brighter than they had in days. "Stop them." Commander Kita's voice roared through the emergency speakers. The dragon must not escape. Scientists and guards rushed into the chamber, but they weren't prepared for what happened next. He-Jin had been pretending to be weaker than he really was. The water Yunho had brought each night had helped the dragon regain some strength. Now, He-Jin raised his head and let out a roar that shook the entire fortress. Chief Scientist Jae-ho tried to activate the backup restraints, but nothing worked. The electromagnetic pulse had fried all the control systems. He watched in horror as the dragon's tail swept across the room, smashing his precious equipment. "This way," Sun Mei shouted, appearing at the chamber door. She had mapped out the shortest path to the outside. He-Jin lowered his head, allowing Yunho and Sun Mei to climb onto his neck. The dragon's scales were warm, and Yunho could feel energy pulsing through the massive body. With another powerful roar, He-Jin gathered his remaining strength. His wings, finally free from their chains, spread wide. The crystal walls of the fortress were strong, but they were no match for a stellar dragon's power. He-Jin crashed through them, sending crystal shards flying everywhere. They burst out into the open air. Behind them, Commander Kita screamed orders to his troops, but it was too late. He-Jin spread his wings wider, catching the solar winds just as he had done in space. The dragon's scales blazed with light as he drew energy from the sun. Freedom was within reach. But as they rose into the sky, Yun-Ho saw the Frost Empire's ships launching from their bases. The escape wasn't over yet. They still had to outrun the fastest fleet in this part of the galaxy. He-Jin soared through the clouds, his massive wings catching the sunlight. Yun-Ho and Sunmei held tightly to the dragon's scales as they climbed higher into the sky. Behind them, 20 crystal ships of the Frost Empire rose in pursuit, their engines glowing with cold blue fire. Commander Kita's voice boomed from the lead ship. "You cannot escape. The eclipse begins in 30 minutes. When it does, the dragon will fall from the sky, and you will all die." He-Jin flew faster, his scales absorbing as much sunlight as possible. Through their mental connection, Yun-Ho felt the dragon's plan. They needed to reach the asteroid field before the eclipse began. There, He-Jin's natural ability to sense energy fields would give them an advantage over the crystal ships. There, Sunmei pointed ahead. A massive field of asteroids floated in space, rocks of all sizes drifting slowly in the darkness. Some were as small as ships, others as large as moons. The spaces between them were narrow and dangerous. The Frost Empire ships followed them into the asteroid field. The smaller ships went first, weaving between the rocks with practiced skill. Commander Kita's flagship stayed back, coordinating the attack. "Surround them," he ordered. "Force them toward the larger asteroids." He-Jin dove between two enormous rocks, barely fitting through the gap. Two pursuit ships tried to follow but crashed into each other, their crystal hulls shattering. The dragon's long tail knocked a third ship into a spinning asteroid, breaking it apart. "The eclipse is starting," Yun-Ho shouted. He could see the moon's shadow beginning to cross the sun. He-Jin's scales were already growing dimmer. The dragon's movements became slower, less graceful. More ships closed in around them. Energy beams shot past, some hitting nearby asteroids and breaking them into smaller pieces. He-Jin dodged most of the attacks, but one beam grazed his wing. The dragon roared in pain but kept flying. "Look!" Sunmei pointed to a strange cloud ahead. It was a nebula, a massive cloud of gas and cosmic dust. Beautiful colors swirled within it, purple, blue, and green. "Can we hide in there?" He-Jin understood. The dragon changed direction, heading straight for the nebula. The Frost Empire ships followed, but they had to slow down. Their sensors couldn't see clearly through the cosmic dust. The eclipse was almost complete now. He-Jin's scales had lost most of their glow, and his wing beats were becoming weaker. But the dragon had one last trick to use. Inside the nebula, He-Jin could absorb energy directly from the cosmic gases. It wasn't as strong as sunlight, but it would help them survive. Commander Kita realized their plan too late. "Stop them before they reach the nebula," he ordered. But his ships were scattered throughout the asteroid field, trying to avoid collisions. Only his flagship was close enough to attack. The massive crystal ship fired its main weapon. A beam of frozen energy shot toward them. At the last second, He-Jin spun in space, using his tail to deflect the beam back of the ship. The frozen energy hit the flagship's crystal hull, creating deep cracks. With his remaining strength, He-Jin flew into the nebula. The swirling gases surrounded them, hiding them from view. The dragon's scales began to absorb the nebula's energy, glowing with new colors. They couldn't stay here forever, but they only needed to wait until the eclipse ended. Commander Kita's damaged flagship hung at the edge of the nebula, unable to follow. His angry voice came through one last time. "This isn't over. The Frost Empire will hunt you across the galaxy." But Yun-Ho smiled as he patted He-Jin's scales. They had survived the chase. Now they just needed to find somewhere safe to rest and heal. Somewhere far from the Frost Empire's reach. 3 months after their escape, He-Jin glided through space toward a beautiful blue planet. Yun-Ho and Sun-Mai sat comfortably between the dragon's shoulder blades, protected by the energy field He-Jin created around them. The planet below was covered in vast oceans, perfect for a stellar dragon's needs. No signs of any Frost Empire ships, Sun-Mai said, checking the small scanner she had taken from the fortress. She looked different now, more relaxed. Her blue skin had taken on a healthier glow since they escaped. They landed on a small island surrounded by clear water. Palm trees swayed in the warm breeze, and colorful birds flew overhead. He-Jin lowered his head, and his two friends climbed down. The dragon's scales now shone with their full brightness, showing that he had fully recovered his strength. "This is perfect," Yun-Ho said, watching as He-Jin drank from the ocean. "The Frost Empire won't find us here. This planet is too far from their territory." Through their mental connection, He-Jin shared his happiness. The dragon had grown stronger during their journey, and his telepathic powers had increased. Now he could share not just images, but also feelings and ideas more clearly. As they set up their camp on the beach, He-Jin suddenly raised his head. He had sensed something in space, a familiar energy pattern. The dragon launched into the sky, flying toward a cluster of distant asteroids. Yun-Ho and Sun-Mai watched nervously, wondering what had caught his attention. When He-Jin returned an hour later, he was carrying something in his claws. As he landed, they saw what it was, a cluster of large, shimmering eggs. Dragon eggs, hidden among the asteroids many years ago. "Are those?" Sun-Mai couldn't finish her question, too amazed by what she was seeing. He-Jin shared memories through their mental link. Before the Frost Empire began hunting dragons, the stellar dragons had hidden eggs in safe places throughout the galaxy. They knew that someday, when it was safe, these eggs would hatch and bring new dragons into the universe. Yun-Ho touched one of the eggs gently. It was warm, and he could feel something moving inside. "They're alive," he whispered. "All this time, they've been waiting." The dragon created a nest in a sheltered cove, where warm water from a hot spring would help keep the eggs at the right temperature. Through their connection, He-Jin explained that the eggs would hatch in about a year. The baby dragons would need teachers, both dragon and human, to learn about the galaxy. News of their escape had spread through the galaxy. Other members of the Frost Empire began questioning their leader's cruel methods. Some, inspired by Sun-Mai's example, started helping those their empire had hurt. A movement for change was growing. One evening, as they sat watching the sunset, He-Jin shared a vision of the future. He showed them young dragons flying through space, guided by both their dragon elders and human friends. The old partnership between dragons and humans would be renewed, bringing balance back to the galaxy. "We'll help protect them," Yun-Ho promised, looking at the eggs. "No one will harm them like the Frost Empire harmed you." Sun-Mai nodded in agreement. "And we'll teach others what we've learned. That true power comes from helping each other, not from causing pain." He-Jin spread his wings, catching the last rays of sunlight. His scales reflected the colors of the sunset, creating a beautiful light show over the water. The dragon's heart was full of hope. He was no longer the last of his kind, no longer alone. Thanks to the courage of a young human and the kindness of an empire soldier who chose to do what was right, the stellar dragons would fly again. The universe was vast, but on this peaceful planet, a new family had formed. Together, they would protect the future of both dragons and humans, proving that friendship and compassion were stronger than any empire's weapons.